Good morning, Abhishek. It is Friday. This is the second attempt at making a video about placebo effect. I tried making a video. It turned out to be a 30-minute video with all ideas, all topics, just kind of haphazard, like no script, and it was pretty, chaotic to say the least. It was very messy, and it didn't even get the point across that I was trying to make. So here's a second attempt. I have a script right here in front of me. I have documents. I have research that I've done. At least enough research that's making me comfortable to talk about this again. And so here it goes. I really just started this whole entire thought process. I think it started probably 8 months, 10 months ago. And so the first my main question was to start improving my daily routine, and I wanted to inculcate habits about the morning routine, or just what kind of lunch or dinner should I have, things like that. What kind of exercise, just just a basic daily routine, and then kind of work toward it. And so I started looking at videos and articles, things that my friends recommended me, stuff like that. It's just I even started a book called 4 Hour Body, and it was just I just kept diving deeper and deeper into it, and I started realizing that there was a lot of contradicting evidence for a lot of these ideas, for a lot of these recommendations on what you should be doing for your routine. And so it also kind of felt that a lot of these suggestions didn't have a direct connection, at least an intuitive connection to biology. And so I started reading more, started reading more in depth, and as methods started getting more and more aggressive, like the Wim Hof method or stuff like that, they started getting seemingly random as well. I learned about the placebo effect in a bit more medical sense, and how homeopathy, in fact, has been accused of it. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to just create a question for myself, do some research on it, and then see where I'm going with this. So my question that I wanted to answer was that how much of internet wellness that we've been seeing, all over YouTube or like Instagram, TikTok, whatever, how much of it is placebo and how much of it is biologically supported. And I kind of realized while I was doing whatever research that I did end up doing, however less or more it might be, that a better question to ask here is that, knowing what placebo effect is, how many of these internet suggestions are placebos, and is it still worthwhile pursuing them, knowing that they are? So yeah, I mean, that's basically the question I wanted to answer. And so I had kind of just jumped into it, started reading about it. And so the first thing I learned was placebo. The origin of the word, linguistics. That's kind of my thing. That's how I generally start. Placebo means "I shall please" in Latin, which kind of loosely translates to something that is meant to appease a patient mentally, rather than provide actual direct chemical or biological changes. But that's kind of already where the definition and the root word kind of start diverging, really. Because even though an administered dose may be inert, like you may be given sugar pills, or you may be given a saline IV or whatever, the act of administration itself can kick in our own sympathetic nervous system, and our body gives a psychosomatic reaction out of it. So just thinking that we are receiving medicines makes our own body produce chemicals that make us better, right? So that's what kind of psychosomatic means. Physical manifestation of a purely psychological trigger. That's basically the idea. So this once you start diving deeper into this, you realize that this act is actually so effective that a lot of studies have found that open label placebo, where you're telling the patient that the medicine itself that you're giving them is placebo. It's nothing but just sugar pills or whatever. It is effective in selected scenarios, and the effect may be reduced, but it's still the effect still exists beyond statistical doubt. That's the idea. And so there's also for a small side note, there's also a thing called nocebo. Just I wanted to mention, just because of how placebo is I shall please, nocebo is I shall harm. And so if you think that something that you've ingested is going to harm you, it does actually start harming you, which is a very interesting thing to think about, that it's not just our body trying to heal itself, it's also trying to harm itself based on what you just think, which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, just going through the Wikipedia page of placebo effect, that's where I started my research. I went into the research papers that they had referenced a bit. I kind of understood like maybe 30-40% of it. And obviously, I'm not in the medical field, and so I tried to understand what I could, made my own conclusions. So, but take whatever I say with at least three grains of salt, if not two, because like it's yeah, I couldn't understand a lot of it. So yeah, and I'm gonna keep referencing a lot of things and putting as much stuff as I can in the description so that it is as clear as possible. So yeah, I referenced some paper that claim that placebo effects are effectively non-existent over different kinds of trials. So there's this concept called meta-analysis, where you don't just take a single trial. A single trial consists of multiple patients, and then meta-analysis is an analysis of multiple trials at once. So you trying to eliminate factors that may be specific to a given trial. And so if there are like 10, 20, 50 trials done for that same experiment, there may be some hidden factors that affected some trials in some way that were not like those same variables weren't present in the other trials. And so that's essentially what meta-analysis does. It tries to remove variables that even the doctors themselves couldn't remove, uh, you know, due to whatever problems they might have, essentially. And so there are, as I mentioned, there are studies that show that the effects are kind of non-existent, but also because of this entire concept of meta-analysis depends on ironing out specific things that happen in trials. There are some people who debate that in placebo effect specifically, meta-analysis is not the right way to analyze data, which is, I mean, meta-analysis seems like the right thing to do for any kind of medical trial. But then because placebo effect really depends on a person-to-person basis or case-to-case basis, but some people argue that a lot of meta-analysis is actually over-generalized and it needs to be analyzed on a condition-by-condition basis. So yeah, that's what I really found. And with that, I read that this condition by condition analysis, a lot of different conditions have had different outcomes, and something really crucial was with analgesics, basically painkillers, pain medicine. And so its effectiveness is really seen in administering analgesics to patients. And so they've been shown to consistently work better when the patient knows that they have been given a painkiller. So much so that there are some studies that also say that it's not just a short-term and a long-term component to a painkiller, but there's also a psychosomatic factor to the painkiller, on what kind of pill you should be designing. Should it be a pill versus a capsule? What color should the capsule be? Things like that. And it's, of course, the research is very spurious. I mean, in the sense that there's not a lot of clear evidence, statistical evidence towards a particular condition. The idea that conditions change the effectiveness of the exact same drug being administered is significant. That aspect itself is statistically significant, and that's what I wanted to bring up here. And so my own personal theory seems to it feels like it's connected to this kind of pain resilience that people build in the army, or in other professions, where you don't learn to uh, you don't learn to hide your pain, but you just kind of training it away. So it's just there are people who you tase and they don't even they don't even flinch, or they don't even drop down. Like it's pretty fascinating. And I think it's kind of similar to that you're trying to train your brain into not feeling the pain that exists. And so pain is a lot more susceptible to your thoughts, essentially. That's, I guess, the key takeaway here. um, Going a bit deeper, research, there's a research towards this. this idea of endogenous opioids. Opioids, if you remember from your chemistry class, would be narcotic drugs that are meant as painkillers, and then endogenous opioids is basically generated from the inside. So opioids that your body itself generates when it senses pain. That's what that is what needs to be generated to reduce the effect of pain. And then the idea is that these endogenous opioids are secreted when they when the psychosomatic trigger happens in your head. And so yeah, that was actually pretty interesting, because you've seen that kind of, again, not statistically significant, but still we've seen cases where the same condition produces very different reactions between in people. There may be the same kind of pain is experienced in different ways by different people, essentially, right? And so yeah, that's really what I found. A personal side note, by the way, there's this magazine called Pain, which was really fascinating to me. It's a scientific magazine with its research papers. It puts out research towards not just pharmaceutical drugs about pain, but also how people manage pain, and the sociological component to it, the societal component to it, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, there is a lot of research, enough that there is a magazine called Pain. That was pretty fascinating to me. Just like you have science, you have nature, you have pain, which is interesting to say the least. Yeah, so with that in mind, I started digging deeper on where placebo effect is actually being used by the medicine industry itself. And so there are two main places that I found. First was the clinical trials themselves, where the placebo effect is used kind of as the control group, and you try to eliminate the placebo effect in medicines where patients appear to get better just by administration of the vaccines itself. And so you may have this idea that the worst performing patients would perform better no matter what. So you're kind of trying to eliminate this regression to the mean from the control group. And so actually that's a kind of a separate tangent that was actually discussed in a really great video by Veritasium. So I'm going to link that down below as well. Do check that out. It's pretty good. I mean, the video talks about just specifically regression in the to the mean, but there's a part of the video where he talks about why this is important in designing control groups and testing medicines out multiple times through multiple trials before having it released out to the public, essentially. Yeah, I mean, with that, that kind of also leads you to think. I felt that when I read about this control group concept, that it kind of feels controversial, that if for example there is a disease for which you're making a medicine, and the medicine already exists, and you're trying to create a better one, basically. So a control group shouldn't have no medicine. They should have the next best medicine available, because you're kind of making it unethical by not telling the patient whether they're gonna actually get better or not. And so that's why it's this concept of using just pure placebo effect has been it's recently come under fire, really. That's the idea. And so this is actually one of the key points of debate in the Declaration of Helsinki, which is an international code of conduct, which is no longer international in a way, because FDA, the government, the body here, kind of exited the declaration. I think it was in 2006. Yeah, there you go. And there were debates over clarification and revisions, and a lot of revisions were done over the years. And FDA just decided that they'll do their own standards for this, and the standard is called NIH Training in Human Subject Research Participation Protection, which is I mean, two things about that. First, a huge mouthful name that doesn't have a short form. In the US, that sounds pretty rare, to be honest. And second, it is fascinating how that we humans can't even agree on the same set of principles for medicine, and we're expecting that to happen for politics, which is a tangent that I'd love to go into, but that's not what the video is about. So a story for another time, as Gary would call it. Yeah, and once US exited this declaration, EU started having its own ethical standards as well, and they also exited from this. And so I'm not sure how many countries actually still follow this declaration of Helsinki, but the EU's practice is called Good Clinical Practice, GCP, not to be confused with Google Cloud Platform. That's a very bad joke. Yeah, and so as I said again, probably might be the first time that the US has a worse acronym than anyone else uh, in the world, really. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, so that is the first place where it's still being used. The second is not exactly what you would call a clear usage of placebo effect. It's basically just used in alternative medicine. So this is basically referring to wellness therapy or homeopathy. And so this is not just something that I'm using as my own opinions. And there have been multiple research bodies. There's been the UK Science and Tech Committee. The Indian Supreme Court has themselves declared, in one of their rulings said that it is homeopathy and wellness therapy, which are basically there are other alternative medicines as well, and they're all basically grouped together into this thing called alternative medicine. And so they say that alternative medicine is a kind of placebo, and it is unethical to administer them, and so it is unethical to call a homeopathic doctor a doctor, or call a wellness therapist a doctor or whatever. So yeah, that's essentially the idea. Um, and yeah, of course, I mean, we've talked about label placebos before. This is definitely not open label placebo. The patient doesn't know then that they've been just given sham medicine, really, just something that is not meant to directly give a direct chemical change in your body. And so it just becomes unethical where the patient doesn't know and is actually sometimes actively misled into believing that there are chemical or biological effects of the administered medicine. So yeah, I mean, the reason for why this is still controversial is because it still does have anecdotal benefits. This is selected few cases claiming that a particular XYZ alternative treatment cured them specifically, and so there's no statistical evidence, proper data to prove something like that. But there is some stories, popping out here and there, just anecdotal claims, really. As there was this line where I read that the plural of anecdote is not data, right? And so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, I'm trying to put these things as neutrally as possible, so just something to think about. So yeah, with all of this information that I read, a lot of alternative medicines, alternative techniques, things like that, I came up with three kind of conclusions, so to speak, on what I should take away from this, and maybe what you should take away from this. So the bad conclusion is that the placebo effect is essentially sham and should be avoided as much as possible, since it relies on the patient thinking that they're getting better while they actually aren't getting better. This is a bad conclusion because, of course, the patient is actually getting better, but they're getting better anecdotally, right? Not statistically. So that's a bad conclusion, really. A good conclusion, but it's not directly useful, is that placebo effect in general is a grossly understudied phenomenon, but it has real unproven benefits to the human body, and we need an ethical baseline that we can all agree on, and need to explore this effect further. This is a good conclusion, but again, not really useful to us specifically on what we can take away. So here's another conclusion, a slightly more risky, slightly more subtle conclusion to be made. Final learning out of this is that much of internet knowledge is anecdotal, and the best way to know what works for you is to experiment, really. And this conclusion is a bit risky because you need to be able to distinguish whether something you consume is chemically altering your body, or if it's a psychosomatic only response. And also because there's nothing wrong with placebo, but knowing that it is placebo reduces its effect. So there's a fine line to be walked over there as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I gathered, and so there's been instances where I've, whatever medicine is, brought to me, I kind of just, whatever change that you're trying to bring towards, towards yourself, I kind of start dismissing it, calling it placebo, and just thinking that does it really help you or not, right? And so that's what I was doing before I started the research. And after I started the research, after I finished it, I still have kind of the same thing, but I'm still kind of wary to say that, because just because something is placebo doesn't mean, again, that it is, it is not working for you. It might work for you. There has been anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is not no evidence, but it's certainly not statistical evidence as well. So yeah, that's what I've kind of tried to be.